Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 63 of Relating to DevSecOps, where we explore the development, security, and operations issues of today so we could solve real-world problems with people that face them. I'm Ken Toller, joined by my co-host Mike McCabe, and we are going to dive into an auditing and monitoring topic today. But before we do that, just a couple of quick upcoming announcements. We finally have our first tentative guest potentially booked, right, Mike? So
we have two in the pipeline.
Two in the pipeline. So very exciting.
Some
Both
interesting folks.
non-security people, right?
Non-security people with a security edge, I'd say.
Yeah, like a security aura, security floater, if you will.
A taste of security.
Yeah.
Security floater. I'm not sure if a security floater sounds great.
Yeah, probably not. I mean, depends on whether you're talking about tiki drinks or other places floaters are mentioned. Off to a good start. So, so just that is coming up. So you hope, we've been talking about it for almost 3 years now, but we really wanted to make sure that we had some guests that were not just in the security echo chamber. And so we're fulfilling the dream here with some non-security folks. So keep an eye out for that, or an ear out for that. The other thing is just continuing to keep you all in the loop around Mike and I delivering our Terraform and infrastructure as code security workshop training at LastCon. So if you are interested in that, please register and let us know if you have any questions about content or what to expect from that. You can reach us here or anywhere else. You'll find us on social media. And with that, we can jump right in. So Mike, you and I were talking a little bit about logging and monitoring. And one of the things that I've been looking through, or I guess investigating for a variety of clients, and things that come up a lot are how we integrate incident response into DevSecOps or software pipelines. And I also see, mentions of logging and monitoring and CSPM and cloud and the merging of all of these technologies. And I think one of the things I find myself explaining a lot, or at least answering questions about, is CSPM, Cloud Security Posture Management, versus a SIEM, versus a log aggregator, versus something like Datadog, or some of these runtime monitoring systems. And so I wanted to kind of break open that a little bit on today's episode and talk about what the differences between these different tools and technologies are, how to use them, what to look for, and things of that nature. So I think just wanted to throw it over to you and, just ask, let's just start simply. What do you perceive, or what do you like to explain as the difference between your logging and monitoring platform, maybe your SIEM, your security incident event manager, or your CSPM, your cloud security posture management?
Yeah. I think they're all somewhat related, especially log aggregation and SIEMs go hand in hand, right? You have to have your logs going into something like Splunk or another SIEM. Splunk is the big one of the big names for that. And then CSPMs kind of go hand in hand a little bit because sometimes that feeds into your SIEM as well. But log aggregation at the end of the day is just funneling all of your logs somewhere, and making sure it's centralized and making sure you're storing those and having it someplace that's accessible. Even if that's just S3 and you're using Athena to query it. Evan Johnson might hate me for plugging Athena, but still, if you have nothing, it's better than nothing. So, and if you're AWS, it's easy to get going for the most part. So, log aggregation is just pulling all those into one place. Preferably, I think one thing people don't think about is making sure your logs end up in a place that's not where they get sourced from. So don't have your CloudTrail logs from your account going into the same account, because if someone has admin access to the account, they're just going to erase the CloudTrail logs after turning it off. So always send those to into something like Splunk or into an S3 bucket elsewhere. Then you have SIEMs, Splunk. I mean, there's other SIEMs out there, but that's really where you enrich the data from your logs, determine events that have happened, root account login, or it could be endpoint management stuff. A process spins up that looks bad, and then you kick off, your triage process. If it's your SOC or your endpoint management software does something, that's like the whole idea of a SIEM is to have a centralized area for logs to go in, events to get triggered, and other actions to happen. CSPMs are more about monitoring the cloud infrastructure and configuration. So that's for more than just active monitoring. That's also for misconfigurations and compliance, things like that. Like you're not going to trigger the SOC to fix an unencrypted EBS volume unless you've solved everything else in the world in your environment. But those are useful too to integrate into SIEM. So if you do see a root login, an S3 bucket does become public. You see a million EC2s get spun up and guard duty alerts going off about crypto miners. Like that's all stuff you want from your CSPM to go into your SIEM to alert the right folks. That's how I see it, at least.
Got it. And then one clarification. Mike is going to say SIEM a lot, and I'm going to say SIM a lot, and we're going to be talking about the exact same thing. Because that's how security rolls. And we will debate that on another episode. We'll just focus on pronunciation of a SIM. But
yes.
Following up on your comments here, you mentioned that these so I appreciate the definitions. One of the things that I think I want to hear your take on is how to combine the technologies, and at what point do you combine the technologies? And I'll clarify just a little bit in that you'll have some CSPMs that will, as you said, provide an output or a SIM that will ingest information from a CSPM or from some source. So how do you sort of connect these in your head? Because CSPMs usually have some sort of dashboard or incident investigation or something that they want you to use to tackle these things. And then your SIM or your log aggregator is also doing this. So how do people choose which one to use, like which one to use over another, or should they use them separately? What's your opinion or take on that?
I mean, I'm sure you've seen it done differently at different places, but I mean, I think in my view, I like a more simple integration where everything funnels to one place, and then you have actions that get kind of triaged off of that. So if that's your SIEM, that's like your central point of here's the alerts that we care about, and these are the things that get kicked off if it's automated workbooks or manual workbooks. But I mean, I think, and I'm curious to see what you've seen too, is when people have something like a CSPM, they might just have that shooting off emails to whoever can fix something. If that's like cloud ops versus your SOC, to fix something in the environment if they see it right away, because they're just going around that whole process and just saying like, okay, this is an issue, someone go fix it right away, versus getting triaged to your SOC and then going back to the same folks. So I think I've seen it be kind of inconsistent where not all your security alerts are going to one place where they probably should. But yeah, people have it set up in different ways. So
yeah, I mean, I'm trying to see if there's some general guidance on it, because the way that I look at it, I might ramble a little bit, just fair warning, is we almost arrive, like sometimes you almost arrive at having some of these tools, like I'm just gonna say the name. So like CrowdStrike or SentinelOne or something like that. You have like an endpoint detection and response that kind of gets you in the door of these tools, and then it has all these other features and things that you can use, like a CSPM and container security, and it kind of like guides you slowly into using this dashboard that has these things, but it may not offer everything that you want. And so the reason I think this came up for me is because you have this blending of technologies where it sort of feels like a SIM, and it probably for in some cases could almost be considered someone's SIM, but then maybe it doesn't take in all the information you want out of a SIEM. You really have to buy their product in order to use a particular feature or function of that suite of tools. And if they don't do that, they're not acting as the SIEM. So if it gives you everything you need, great. You can use that for your incident management, event management, even your cloud security posture. But then if it starts to get to a point where it doesn't actually fulfill your needs, you're kind of trying to push everything into a dashboard. So there's almost this pivot point that may or may not occur depending on where an organization is and what is important to them and what they're reacting to. And so I don't know. I don't know if there's a way to sort of go down this path of you should do this for CSPM and it should go into Splunk, or it should go into a SIEM, or it should go into a log aggregator, it should go into whatever. I don't know if there's a prescriptive way to look at that. So I guess what I'm trying to unpack here is, what are the decision points or data points people can use in order to make that decision for them inside of an organization? And in areas where you've seen it be successful, what were the indicators of that? Or maybe in the areas that you've seen one approach fail, what caused it to fail and what did they pivot to?
Yeah, I mean, I think about it as figure out who's going to triage and fix these issues, and then figure out what system works best for that. So if you have all your CSPM alerts for critical issues going to your SIEM, but then no one in the SOC can actually address anything that happens there, and they just page someone else who then gets alerted, like why have that workflow? Why add that delay? CloudTrail already has a delay. Then you get it into a SIEM, then a ticketing system, then a SOC analyst tier one has to pick it up, and then escalate it potentially. Then like eventually CloudOps gets paged, and an hour's gone by, and someone has torn down your production environment. I'm just spitballing here, but I've seen setups like that where it's literally from the event to someone getting paged, it's an hour, and that's more than enough time to do some damage. So I think you have to think about it. Who can triage and fix an issue as fast as possible? Sometimes that's the SOC, and they're best set up to have visibility kind of across the board, and they have triage systems. They have escalations. They have that whole communication system set up, but sometimes they're not the best folks for some of these tools, and so I like the idea of everything funneling to one location. So again, you have that one source of kind of issues, one source of truth for events going on in your environment, but that might not always work out best for you if those people aren't, educated about the cloud, don't have even the permissions to fix these things. That I think it's kind of a different discussion. I think SOCs have been more focused on endpoints, what's happening on laptops and desktops, and less in cloud environments. That's changing, but still. So I think you should have your high and critical findings from CSPMs going into your SIEM or SIEM or whatever you want to call it. But I think the most important thing about all of this is, who cares about alerting if no one's fixing stuff? Like the
Right.
stuff that is popping up in your SIEM should not be someone not using a KMS key, but using like the standard AWS key. Like that's not, someone shouldn't be getting paged at 2 a.m. for that. It's the
Yeah.
stuff that's really gone sideways.
Yeah. And you bring up an interesting point, because when I think of these tools, I think that there's a couple of different lenses that you can look at them through. Like on one hand, what you were describing is, the delay to someone getting alerted. There is this concept, or the intention behind implementing these tools, which is, I want to know when something bad happens so that I can react quickly to it. So it is really an incident response capability that you have, where you are trying to respond quickly to something that is happening in real time. And then you also have, especially with things like Splunk, or where you're holding historical data, where you want this capability to do a forensic investigation. To, after the response, you want to figure out, like, what's the root cause, what are the things that we have to fix. It's more than just the response. It's sort of that second phase. And then I think that the EDR tools and even the CSPMs have kind of two flavors, because when you initially deploy it, it's really kind of serving as a vulnerability management tool, because it's identifying a bunch of misconfigurations that you have to go and fix. And then those, like you said, get triaged, but they really are identified vulnerabilities right? That you have to go and assign someone to fix, and that can take the same sort of cycle as a vulnerability that you would find out of like Nessus or a scanner or something like that. So it's almost like, what are you trying to achieve with the tool? Because it may not be that you want your CSPM findings initially to go into an incident response process. You probably want it to go into a vulnerability management process where you are fixing a bunch of things, and then it serves as the same function serves as a incident response capability down the road. And so it's an interesting view because it's not like our vulnerability management, like our scanners don't do this, right? They don't serve this dual function. When a scan goes out and scans a port and finds it open, it's always treated as a vulnerability. But for CSPMs, it's like on initial deployment, it's treated as a vulnerability management capability, and then after that, it becomes an incident response capability. Do you see that same trend?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's yeah, like 98% of the alerts out of a CSPM are going to be compliance and just vulnerability management stuff you have to fix. But there's that 2%, maybe even 1% of things in your cloud environments that are incidents, like the things that should never happen. Root account logins are like the classic example. So I think those are the kind of things that you can use a CSPM, because otherwise you're just going to be building that tooling yourself to monitor your cloud environment. And you can do some of that stuff with, just monitoring CloudTrail and shovel your CloudTrail logs into Splunk and then build alerts on Splunk as well. But, the benefit of the CSPM is it has most of that rule set built out for you, so you don't have to do it again yourself. So yeah, I mean, I think it's mostly a vulnerability management tool, configuration management tool for your cloud environment. I like to call them now the firewalls of cloud. Like they're just shiny boxes blinking red and green and telling us things are messed up, and
Right.
everyone's like, "Yep, I'll fix that one of these days." So it's not that they don't have value; it's just that the amount of noise coming out of them is amazing these days. But I think there is that 1% where you really have to pay attention, and you have to, as cloud operations, as cloud security, as incident response, you have to define what those are and how to remediate those things. And there's a debate on whether the SOC will do that, if cloud operations does that, if individual developers are paged at 2 a.m. to fix things. That's a kind of case by case basis, but that definitely plays more of an incident response role.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I think it really comes down to understanding what you want to onboard the tooling for and making sure that it fits into the right place. I think too often we spin up something like like a CSPM, it lights up and we go to fix it, but it's and we don't know how to handle it or where to place it and what to do and how to combine these different technologies. And I think that a lot of the CSPM providers are also offering other capabilities that spread out into these other security practices. So it's important to understand which function it's actually filling, because there's nothing wrong with, I think, operating both, right? If a dashboard for your CSPM gives you a good view into something, then it certainly is worth it to use that, especially in an incident management scenario where you are trying to respond quickly, incident response scenario where you're trying to respond quickly. If that gives you the fastest path, then great. But it should also be available in that SIEM or in that aggregator to understand how that affects the rest of the environment or the rest of the sources that you're looking at, because it might not be the whole story, or that particular vendor may not give you all the information that you need. So I think that the collection of all those events into a central place does more than just make things pretty. It gives you a more content-rich picture of what you're facing in either an incident response scenario or in a forensic investigation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you touched on one other thing about SIEMs or SIMs. Can't remember which pronunciation you prefer,
Oh, you're the SIEM, and then I'm SIM.
SIEM. Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. Are you a fan of The Sims? It was a good game back in the day.
Yeah, it was good. Yeah. Yeah. It seems
But
like it was, yeah.
um, moving on. But one thing you kind of touched on too that I think, and I think it's kind of a place where people get tripped up with things like Splunk. Um, the dirty, it's not even a dirty secret. It's just like the secret or the downside of things like Splunk is that it's a volume based pricing tool. So the more
Yeah.
you shove into it, the more useful it becomes, the more expensive it becomes. So it's like, okay, Splunk's going to say, funnel everything here, use this to centralize it, use this to dedupe things, build all of your alerts, and give us $1 million a year, and you're like a 10-person startup. Because the amount of logs that come out of cloud environments these days is just insane.
Yeah, it's wild.
But the other role that these log aggregators have to play is if you know there's an incident going on because you like your CSPM lights up, that's one thing, and you're gonna dive into it and try to figure out. It's probably something that happened recently. Maybe there's some other indicators of compromise that popped up a week ago. But often when people get hacked, like it can be a month, it can be 3 months, it can be 6 months. I've been involved in investigations where it was like the issue popped up over a year ago in the code, and they're just now discovering it. So who knows how long, that SQL injection or whatever it might be might have been out there and been exploited. And can you afford to have your web application logs from a year ago in Splunk? No. So then what do? You have to funnel all of that into another log aggregation tool, Elk or something cheaper, so you can have that historical data there. So it's like, it's um I don't know what the real critique is. I mean, Splunk has to make money, but that's the trap of buying these tools is that they're only really good for recent history and real time log aggregation. No one can afford. I mean, I've worked at Fortune 30s. They don't have a year worth of logs in Splunk. They have 60 days at most. That's the most
Yeah.
they can afford.
Yeah,
So I don't know. What's
and
your
like you said, and no, I mean, like it scales. The larger the organization is, typically the larger the workloads are, the more logs they have, the more data they have, and so it's not like, I mean, it definitely scales in that direction where it becomes more unaffordable the larger the business is and the larger the data set is. So, yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I mean, I do think it's a really tough problem because you meet people that are like, you need to log everything, because you never know when you're going to need the data. And I do agree. I mean, that's in a perfect world where data is free, and the collection and massaging of that data and sort of workability of that data is free. That would be great. But in reality, it costs a lot of money to do interesting things with that data, and until that gets really cheap, it's going to be difficult to do that. Not to say that you also don't want to keep things forever. I mean, I think the security industry knows that, it's a liability in some cases. But I do think that it is trying to be cognizant of if you are making a decision in budgeting, like trying to be cognizant of the data that you need and have the richest data set you can have for the time period that you are concerned about, and then build that in layers. I think a lot of people focus on like only making sure that production workloads get into into the log aggregator or into the SIEM. And I almost disagree with that, because it's like, if those are the most lockdown environments as well, typically. So it's like those are the things that are going to have the most rigor, the most inspection, the most approvals, and it's going to be that rogue development environment. You have no logs around that, ends up getting a box popped and someone internal, being able to move laterally into the production environment. And I think that is, so what is the right answer there? I think it's like back to threat modeling and figuring out like, where do you want the logs? How do you want them delivered? And being explicit to a degree around how good that initial source is for logging. I think the other thing is folks have a tendency to just like, hey, anything that the application can deliver, send. And there may be some areas where it's like, maybe you need the access logs for Nginx, but you can split it into your security events that you want versus your application events. And maybe the more verbose data sets, you can put into the free tool, and the more sort of prescriptive data sets you can put into the SIEM. I actually don't know. I think that I've seen different strategies work for different people, and it really, you don't know that it doesn't work until it's like it's too late, which
Yeah.
I think is why folks err in the side of caution so much in their recommendations in saying
Mhm.
log everything all the time as long as you can.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think it's tricky. I mean, when when we do reviews, we encourage like a lot of logging with the caveat of you don't need to log everything. Like if you have a bucket that has no sensitive data in it, or it's a intentionally public bucket for assets or something like that, like you need access logging on that? Probably not. Um, do you need versioning on it? Maybe. Do you need like, every piece of every piece of S3 kind of configuration on that? Probably not. But yeah, you have to do it's threat modeling case by case basis where, you know, figure out what is your sensitive data. I'm not going to use the word crown jewels, but figure
Yeah.
out your crown jewels and and make the right decisions about that stuff. I think the funny thing is we dealt with this in a recent incident where the attacker was using post requests. So Nginx logs show that it's a post request, show that the URL is getting hit, but you don't log the actual body of the request. You wouldn't want to do that. You'll have cookies, you'll have passwords, you'll have credit cards if you accept credit cards. So you would never actually want, from a security perspective, to log those things. But then when it came to an incident, we were somewhat blind to figure out what was actually going on because we couldn't actually see what the attacker was doing beyond the fact that we knew, it was SQL injection and they were hitting a post endpoint a gajillion times. It had some other indicators we could use to figure out what was going on, but like the main thing that would have been helpful, verbose logging of the payloads, wasn't turned on for security reasons, which makes sense. So it's a funny catch 22 in ways.
Yeah, and I struggled with that for a long time a few years ago around trying to get application developers to log events that they that we felt were like security relevant. At the time, I had a hard time articulating like what would be security relevant, and so it was just um, we were talking about access logs, and so it ended up being they wanted to log the entire request and response, and we're like, same thing, for you is or that you were just saying is, well, we're going to get data that we don't want, and that if we log the full request and response, that puts us in a really weak position from a legal standpoint, and a variety of other reasons. And so, but trying to get someone to write a logger for classes and endpoints is like a big ask. And I think it was early enough in my career where I maybe didn't realize how big of an ask that was. And I'm like, I don't understand. I mean, just log the things that you think are that you care about. And it's just if you have that thought, I mean, just think about the extra work if you had to add, whatever, maybe even if it's 3 lines of code per class, like, or per
Yeah.
method or per function, like that's a lot. And then once you get it, you're trying to say, well, you want particular information or this, that, and the other thing. And I think that you're asking a lot. So if there are things that security folks want, I think it's get familiar with the code base and make those commits, kind of like we were talking about before with making PRs. If there's something that you think that like is a good remediation action to a function, or like to something that you've seen or something that you want to see logged, and you want something called out specifically, I mean that's a good entry point to be able to say, yeah, I'm going to write this log entry for every time that this method runs, and that way we can capture things like when somebody submits a post body, and we can exclude the things that we think are sensitive or something like that.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of tools that will help you with that too, where it basically says like look for these patterns, SSNs or credit card numbers, and like pulls them from the logs, which would definitely be helpful. But again, it's like if you miss something, you're like, hey, we have 10 years worth of passwords or credit card numbers. Even I mean, GitHub had that issue. I think it was a year or two ago where they were, I think, logging passwords. and had to rotate a bunch of people's passwords. So yeah, it happens. It's definitely a catch-22 on certain things. But I mean, I think when it comes to advice for people trying to figure out what to log and what to put into their SIEM, the thing that I always tell people, and the thing that always comes up during incident response when you're always working from imperfect information, is like be able to, for any of your systems, be able to tell a story of who did what, when, and how. You know, like who requested this endpoint with what user agent, browser, whatever, from what IP, and when was that? Be able to say that for every one of your systems. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to log the entire post request body, but making sure you can tell that story. Same thing for your databases, same thing for kind of the whole stack. You don't have to replicate it over and over again, but at least be able to, take time to look at your logs and say, okay, we can say this happened this date from where, from who, and keep that for more than 30 days, please.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you will not always discover that you've been hacked the day of the hack. You will discover a long time after.
And it might not, and 30 days may not be enough. I mean, even 60 days, a year may not be enough. Some of these things lie in wait. I mean, I think, so we're going a bit over time, but I do want to pivot slightly because one of the questions I want to answer and get your take on too is, given the context of all of these things, you have your CSPM, you've got your log aggregators, you've got potentially application logs. How do you see that this practice or these tools fitting into like a DevSecOps workload? If we're bringing this back to how do we enhance collaboration, how do we ensure that we are putting good automation out there, providing good results? The things that we talk about on this podcast, especially being empathetic to what engineers are looking for or needing to get from their applications, how does it fit in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, my take is probably two. I think from an automation perspective, you can definitely automate making sure these things are turned on and you have the proper logging in place and all of that good stuff. I think the other part is the cultural part is making sure that developers understand that logging is a big part of security as well. It's not just preventing SQL injection or authorization issues. It's also making sure we can tell what's happening in an environment. And I think that's something that developers definitely get because they have to understand what's going on with their errors and things that are happening in the app that they're not expecting. So I think they understand that. But I think socializing that view of logging being an important part of security as well. I think that's the other part of it that I think of. What about you? Throw your own question back to you.
For me, I definitely agree on the automation of getting these deployed. So if it's an agent-based tool, especially in like the SentinelOne, CrowdStrike sort of arena, like known good AMIs or known good deployments that have these things installed at the get-go, or at least that you can verify that it's installed is good. I think one of the areas that I like to play with, even though I don't know if I haven't done it successfully at scale yet, is when you have an incident or an investigation or you're concerned about something or you've detected a vulnerability, definitely remediate the issue, but then use this type of practice to consider how you might protect against that issue in the future. So if it is application logging and or let's say that you mentioned SQL injection a couple of times. So you have a SQL injection vulnerability. Yes, they're still out there. And you've remediated the SQL injection vulnerability.
PHP hasn't gone away.
Yeah.
Just slander a whole group of people.
You've parameterized the queries, you've whatever, done what you need to do. Also, think about within the request that you just remediated, how you might detect attacks against that endpoint, whether that is SQL injection attacks or injection attacks. Do you have the information that you would be able to respond quickly to this in the future? And if the answer is no, what is a logging method or a detection method that you can add to the code base that might help you do that? And if you ask that question in your postmortems, if you have postmortems, then it might lead you to a place where you can better detect attacks against the same endpoint. And that way you're sort of building slowly, as opposed to saying, we need to log every endpoint. Or we need to write, you're creating this big project for engineers to basically just do detection. Instead, you can use your vulnerability management and your incident management to build that muscle slowly over time. And so I think, like I said, I don't think I've done that successfully at scale, because you move so fast. Sometimes you skip the postmortem, or your hygiene isn't good, or you're in the middle of an incident, or you have other things going on. So I get we're all swamped, but that would be sort of my thing, to sort of take a step back and maybe think about each time.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense.
Cool. Any final words from you, Mike, before we close out, or any direction you wanted to take the conversation that we didn't go?
Yeah, I think we covered it pretty well. Just another area of security that is that wonderful quandary of how to do it right, and no one has the correct answer.
Yeah, and we will keep admitting that no one really has the correct answer, and no one has created the silver bullet, no matter which vendor you've talked to at whatever conference you've recently attended.
Yes,
And
exactly.
with that, we will close it out. As always, we really appreciate everyone that takes the time to listen to us ramble and rant about security issues. If you want to get a hold of us or suggest a guest, you can reach us at R2DSO on Twitter. I'm going to continue to call it Twitter. You can also reach us at security@r2dso.com. And you can reach us on LinkedIn as well, if you'd like. That's where we are posting videos and snippets, and talking about more things in security, where you may not get it from us on the podcast on YouTube, or in your favorite podcast aggregator. You're the log aggregator of podcasts. So please reach out to us and let us know what's going on and who you'd like to see. Also, keep an eye out for, or an ear out for, our new guests. Those episodes will be getting cut soon, and we're super excited to have folks on board finally talking to us, and to hear some new and different voices. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.